Yo, this is Puyallup. You got pretty big balls to watch Thorin's YouTube videos.
Stats, statistics are ubiquitous in our modern media-driven world. You have them constantly spammed at you in sports. It's basically the whole purpose of Twitter half the time, to keep you interested, to make you think that this player, it's, the only one of 4 players to have 34 points and 11 rebounds and 9 assists and 1 block on a Tuesday in fucking Detroit. Like, they just do these things to make it seem interesting and to draw you in. Same in politics. That's one of the ways people justify all their biases. Now, obviously, in esports, which overlaps into both those worlds to some degree in terms of how people approach it and how it's presented, you tend to have these stats initially given, so in theory they can provoke discussion, provoke argument, like those stats about Michael Jordan, he won 6, but actually he could have been in 10 and the other guy should have been in 4, but he won 2, so who's better? Like, the problem is this: stats, when they are given as conclusions, as like, well, this decides it, Brady's got 5, 6, this guy's got fucking 2, so that's over. Like, that's the problem. This is the issue that this video is going to be about, because it actually potentially derails, or just does derail, what would be good conversations, or makes them just painfully simplistic. So you never actually get these super experts, really knowledgeable people, to have an interesting discussion. You get them to basically just agree with each other that like 6 is higher than 2. That's a fucking garbage conversation. So if you want to talk about the history of stats in Counter-Strike, well, for the first years of CS, I'm going to say until maybe until like 2005 or something, maybe 2004. I think maybe 2005 is when it was introduced. We didn't have stats anywhere whatsoever. You just had to watch the demo and you could see the scoreboard. That's it. Then we had Gotfrag stats, where they had a pretty good database overall. Sadly, it's now down because Gotfrag, the website's down, so you can't access it. HLTV.org slowly made its inroads as Gotfrag died out. Its own stats system for 1.6 became something quite popular, also disabled now. Sadly, you can't go and check them. And obviously in CSGO, it was a massive deal. You can still see the stats. I would say CSGO is where the game really went completely to stats, it felt like, in terms of the scene, the pros, etc. But even so, back in 2007, you still had players who, no joke, were playing for stats at times and baiting or adapting their game really weirdly if they start off with like a 0-6 score, not playing properly. It's actually something, I'm just going to say it right now, it was an open secret behind the scenes. It's been said in interviews. It's something that used to piss off teammates of GetRight in the early years. But you know what? He wasn't the only one. Like, they felt like, if he was doing bad in stats, they'd see him checking the scoreboard all the time, and they would wonder if he then baited someone, if he then did a certain move, like, was he doing it because of that? This is back in 1.6, remember? So to be fair, he was much younger. He was a newer player to the scene, but he wasn't the only one. A lot of the next generation at that point in time, they just started to play that way, not least because they know they're going to be flamed based on the stats. So from CSGO onwards, stats have been the obsession, and they have displaced actual discussion or qualitative analysis in many cases. It's not that stats are worthless, it's not, but they are misapplied for my money. So this is the way I want to describe it. Like I say in the title, here's another way to think of it. Stats are not the conclusion or the end of the story or the end of the journey. Stats are a signpost pointing somewhere, but you still have to go to that place to find out what it's like, or they're the beginning of the journey or the first step on a journey. So think about this. If a player's stats are bad, these are just below par on the metrics that we're judging them by, like below average or bad for someone who's a star player, that doesn't actually mean he is bad. It means his stats are bad. That's all it tells you. Now, it does tell you that, oftentimes players who have similar stats are bad. But how do you know that? By looking at them in the game, right? So either he is bad, that's one thing it could be suggesting, or his style of play doesn't perform well in stats, but is valuable elsewhere, that doesn't show up in specific stats that we're measuring at this point in time. Understand, I'm not making either case here. I'm saying both are possibilities, and the only way you're going to know is to explore it. So as a result, you have that discussion. You use the eye test to watch some of the games. You use your brain to qualitatively, not quantitatively, qualitatively analyze the decisions he's making, how he fires, the situations he's putting. You look at the guy's role in his team and how he plays from that and to what expectations he's reaching. You take a player, here's an obvious example, right? Statistically, you could find tournaments where someone like Zipnix would have worse stats than Dapper. I've picked someone purposely who's nowhere near the top level in terms of his name and his value. But I actually think Dapper would outfrag Zipnix directly in most scenarios. But the point is, the reason why Zipnix gets to be a better player is Zipnix isn't playing Dapper's role. He's not taking the resources Dapper does. He doesn't know the spots Dapper is either. So that's a different equation. Also, Zipnix is winning, Dapper's losing. Sometimes when you're losing, you can be the guy who still looks all right in a loss. Zipnix can look bad in a win, and it's kind of like, well, did he do that much? It's an interesting topic, right? And that is because also some of the things Xipnix does don't show up on the scoreboard. Like the best example ever, obviously, is the one that we all found out about from those interviews in 2018, where we found out that, you know what, Sticko and Mouse was doing stuff that doesn't show up on the scoreboard. He was using comms. So basically, he was finding ways to make the team and his teammates better in a way that will never show up in a score, especially not on the score page of Sticko, because there's no way to measure those metrics. Likewise, I think Alexi B got criminally underrated by a mixture of media, PR from ENCE players, and then the fact that people couldn't know the impact his in-game leading was having. I'll probably do some content on that soon, because as far as I've heard, it wasn't even just that he was a good caller, which he is. He actually is a pretty legit caller. I've heard he was even helping to micro some of the players that since then have gone to shit individually. Some of them stars, some of them lesser players. So how about MSL in his classic Danish Dig and North teams, right? Not the one now, obviously, right? One of the reasons I always thought he was criminally underrated as an IGL is the way that he would play individually, which would destroy his stats, set up his star player, who typically was his entry, the follow-up player, in a way that made them better than they practically ever were in any other team at any other time in their careers. So as a result, his stats and his success in the game was increasing the stats of a different player. Now, if you just look at those stats, you're going to go, well, MSL's shit, and this fucking config guy, this AZ guy, this Kirby guy, I'm talking about AZ, obviously, when it was back in, like, 2015 here, boys. You'd think, should just keep him and kick the MSL guy. It's like, you won't get that without the MSL guy. Think it through. Look at these players when they go to other fucking teams. So, and by the way, if anyone goes, well, you're about Kirby winning MVP in Astralis, he was nowhere near the dominant individual force he was in Dignitas before he joined the Astralis with Carrigan, and he never was the same in the Astralis that had the major win. Here's the thing. If, instead of thinking this way, you see a stat and go, well, that decides it, it's a higher number, you are now a prisoner of stats. There's actually a concept, I'll probably do a separate video on this sometime, it's called Goddard's Law, and what it essentially says is that when you make stats so that everyone values them too much and that's all they care about, they just become the goal to perform in those limited metrics, and that somewhat defeats the purpose of the stat. The stat was useful if everyone's just playing Counter-Strike, and this gives you a sense for like, how good is someone's overall damage? Where's the ADR? Well, if people obsessively play for ADR and bait and just try and spray people in the back, and if people just played in that particular way, then in that scenario, you'd get amazing ADRs and you'd actually be worse in the game. So now it's just become a self-defeating premise to try and use that as a metric. This is one of the reasons actually I somewhat look down on not just the fact that some of those HLTV type people are obsessed over stats, but that they use them in this manner and then they use it in a condescending and obnoxious manner that just makes it so that you're arrogant about something that's idiotic. Like, you're literally talking about something redundant. Think it through. But they don't do that because they think they've got the secrets to the universe, it would appear, based on their behavior. This reminds me, actually, here's a great example, a good analogy, of the way the MMA rule set works in North America, specifically in the UFC. Now, one of the reasons I don't like that as much as I liked Pride is I don't like the fact that, like, each round is counted separately and then you score that, you don't score the overall fight. I don't like the fact that just taking someone down and then doing nothing to them scores massively and can win you a whole round. Meanwhile, what if the guy on the bottom even did damage to it? Like, it's so fucked that to me, it actually destroys and semi-ruins some aspects of what makes MMA a really amazing sport. It would be a much better sport as it was in Pride, not with all the head kicks necessarily, but with some of the rules of how you judge a fight and the fact that someone can come back in the last 2 minutes and do so well, it counteracts the 8 minutes before. So, historically, you look at stats, even someone like Simple, who has the best stats ever, that depends on the meta he's playing in, that depends on the guns that are viable at the time, that depends on his knowledge of the other teams, that depends on the amount of scouting and prep the other teams do for him, depends on who his teammates are to a lesser degree, depends which specific opponent he is playing against. You can't just take his stats and put them in a vacuum and then put them next to Get Rights in 2013 and go, nah, you know what, Simple's way better. Not at all. We haven't taken into fact all the qualitative elements that would make up that kind of a judgment. It's like this, if you're in basketball, if you're a fan of the NBA and you've been watching The Last Dance and think, MJ is the greatest, I would agree. That's what I come down most days. But I don't agree because he has 6 championships that he's better than LeBron or Kobe or fucking Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Larry Bird or whatever. The fact that LeBron has 3 and Kobe has 5, that's not why they're not as great as Michael Jordan. That's the least interesting discussion you can have. Because again, you're just saying 6 is higher than 5 or 3. So even if I agree that Michael Jordan's the best, I don't agree with you. And that's actually a bigger and more interesting discussion than if I argue with someone who totally disagrees with me, but we start making all cool points and we kind of have a similar criteria, but then he just comes down differently. I'm more in line with him than I'm with you, even though the outcome's the same as what you might say. So the question with Michael Jordan, similarly, would be, how did he get those titles? Who did he play against? What was his role and impact? How did defenses play back then? What was the rule sets at the time? How good were his teams? Like, this is one of the things where, are you starting to get the clue here that this is how you start an interesting discussion? It ain't how you end an interesting discussion. Any interesting stat suggests that you investigate why the stat is the way it is. So think of these premises, and you'll see that they're the beginning of a great discussion, a talk show. You'll even probably, as I say them, think, oh, we should go into that, but I'm not going to, because I'm going to make the point to you to end the video. Was Ziwu better than Simple because he got similar stats with a better team? Is Shox bad because his stats suck most of the time now and he used to be considered a great player? Does he have any value to his teams? Where do we draw the line for what are considered unacceptable performances within the metrics we're using? A la Hunden, who seems to do a lot outside the game and even as a caller inside the game, but then the stats, they kind of suggest something that we have to investigate, right? Mad Lions apparently did, and you know what? They seem to have struck gold by swapping out for a Cillian. They haven't really lost much of a step. How can a player like Fallen average 0.6 something KPR? By the way, that's just like a good, but not even that good. Like, there's many players who are like stars and other teams do way better than that, who are on way worse teams. How can he have that kind of a stat line, even overhaul tournaments, but then just take over big games and sometimes be the MVP of the tournament and the main reason they won? How can he be such a main reason without the stats, which normally is what people use to tell you that you're the main reason that you won? That's the beginning of the discussion, not the end. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Dean Tanglis, Emanuel Särnbratt, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, the Puyallup Tribe, Tobias Bernasconi, Xinged, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my shows? Maybe ask a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the guests on my next content? Maybe you want to take part in one of those donated discussions with me where we go really deep into the weeds. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the description box link below.